Chapter 13. Percy. Forget the chicken nugget smokescreen. Percy wanted Leo to invent an anti-dream hat. That night, he had horrible nightmares. First he dreamed he was back in Alaska on the quest for the Legion's eagle. He was hiking along a mountain road, but as soon as he stepped off the shoulder, he was swallowed by the bog. Muskeg, Hazel had called it. He found himself choking in mud, unable to move or see or breathe. For the first time in his life, he understood what it was like to drown. It's just a dream, he told himself. I'll wake up. But that didn't make it any less terrifying. Percy had never been scared of water. It was his father's element. But since the Muskeg experience, he developed a fear of suffocation. He could never admit this to anyone, but it had even made him nervous about going in the water. He knew that was silly. He couldn't drown. But he also suspected that if he didn't control the fear, it might start controlling him. He thought about his friend, Thalia, who was scared of heights even though she was the daughter of the sky god. Her brother Jason could fly by summoning the winds. Thalia couldn't, maybe because she was too afraid to try. If Percy started to believe he could drown... The muskeg pressed against his chest. His lungs wanted to burst. Stop panicking, he told himself. This isn't real. Just when he couldn't hold his breath any longer, the dream changed. He stood in a vast gloomy space like an underground parking garage. Rows of stone pillars marched off in every direction. Holding up the ceiling, about 20 feet above, freestanding braziers cast a dim red glow over the floor. Percy couldn't see very far in the shadows, but hanging from the ceiling were pulley systems, sandbags and rows of dark theatre lights. Piled around the chamber, wooden crates were labelled props, weapons and costumes. One read, assorted rocket launchers. Percy heard machinery creaking in the darkness, huge gears turning and water rushing through pipes. Then he saw the giant, or at least Percy guessed that he was a giant. He was about 12 feet tall, a respectable height for a cyclops, but only half as tall as the other giants Percy had dealt with. He also looked more human than a typical giant, without the dragon-like legs of his larger kin. Nevertheless, his long purple hair was braided in a ponytail of dreadlocks, woven with gold and silver coins, which struck Percy as a giantish hairstyle. He had a 10-foot spear strapped to his back, a giantish weapon. He wore the largest black turtleneck Percy had ever seen, black trousers and black leather shoes, with points so long and curly they might have been jester slippers. He paced back and forth in front of a raised platform, examining a bronze jar, about the size of Percy. "No, no, no!" the giant muttered to himself. "Where's the splash? Where's the value?" He yelled into the darkness. "Otis!" Percy heard something shuffling in the distance. Another giant appeared out of the gloom. He wore exactly the same black outfit, right down to the curly shoes. The only difference between the two giants was that the second one's hair was green rather than purple. The first giant cursed. "Otis, why do you do this to me every day? I told you I was wearing the black turtleneck today. You could wear anything but the black turtleneck." Otis blinked, as if he'd just woken up. "I thought you were wearing the yellow toga today." "That was yesterday, when you showed up in the yellow toga." "Oh, right, sorry, Elfie." His brother snarled. They had to be twins, because their faces were identically ugly. "Don't call me Effie," Effie demanded. "Call me Ephilatus. That's my name. Or you can use my stage name, the Big F." Otis grimaced. "I'm still not sure about that stage name." "Nonsense, it's perfect. Now, how are the preparations coming along?" "Fine." Otis didn't sound very enthusiastic. "The man-eating tigers, the spinning blades, but I still think a few ballerinas would be nice." "No ballerinas," Ephialtes snapped. "And this thing." He waved at the bronze jar in disgust. "What does it do? It's not exciting." "But that's the whole point of the show. He dies unless the others rescue him, and if they arrive on schedule." "Oh, they'd better," Ephialtes said. "July first, the Kellens of July, sacred to Juno. That's when Mother wants to destroy those stupid demigods and really rub it into Juno's face. Besides, I'm not paying overtime for those gladiator ghosts." "Well then, they all die," Otis said, "and we start the destruction of Rome, just like Mother wants. It'll be perfect. The crowd will love it. Roman ghosts adore this sort of thing." Ephialtes looked unconvinced, but the jar just stands there. "Couldn't we suspend it above a fire or dissolve it into a pool of acid or something?" "We need him alive for a few more days," Otis reminded his brother. "Otherwise, the Seven won't take the bait and rush to save him." I suppose. I'd still like a little more screaming. This slow death is boring. Ah well, what about our talented friend? Is she ready to receive her visitor?" Otis made a sour face. "I really don't like talking to her. She makes me nervous." "But is she ready?" "Yes," Otis said reluctantly. "She's been ready for centuries. No one will be removing that statue." "Excellent." Ephialtes rubbed his hands together in anticipation. "This is our big chance, my brother." That's what you said about our last stunt, Otis mumbled. I was hanging in that block of ice suspended over the river Leif for 6 months, and we didn't even get any media attention. This is different, Ephialtes insisted. We will set a new standard for entertainment. If Mother is pleased, we can write our own ticket to fame and fortune. If you say so, Otis sighed, though I still think those ballerina costumes from Swan Lake would look lovely. No ballet. Sorry. Come, Ephialtes said. Let's examine the tigers. I want to be sure they are hungry. The giants lumbered off into the gloom, and Percy turned towards the jar. I need to see inside, he thought. He willed his dream forward, right to the surface of the jar. Then he passed through. The air in the jar smelled of stale breath and tarnished metal. The only light came from the dim purple glow of a dark sword, its Stygian iron blade set against one side of the container. Huddled next to it was a dejected-looking boy in tattered jeans, a black shirt and an old aviator jacket. On his right hand a silver skull ring glittered. Nico, Percy called, but the son of Hades couldn't hear him. The container was completely sealed. The air was turning poisonous. Nico's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. He appeared to be meditating. His face was pale and thinner than Percy remembered. On the inner wall of the jar, it looked as though Nico had scratched 3 hash marks with his sword. Maybe it had been 3 days that he'd been imprisoned. It didn't seem possible he could have survived so long without suffocating. Even in a dream, Percy was already starting to feel panicky, struggling to get enough oxygen. Then he noticed something between Nico's feet. A small collection of glistening objects no bigger than baby teeth. Seeds, Percy realised. Pomegranate seeds. 3 had been eaten and spat out. 5 were still encased in dark red pulp. Nico, Percy said, where is this place? We'll save you. The image faded, and a girl's voice whispered, Percy? At first, Percy thought he was still asleep. When he'd lost his memory, he'd spent weeks dreaming about Annabeth, the only person he remembered from his past. As his eyes opened and his vision cleared, he realised she was really there. She was standing by his berth, smiling down at him. Her blonde hair fell across her shoulders. Her storm-grey eyes were bright with amusement. He remembered his first day at Camp Half-Blood, 5 years ago, when he'd woken from a daze and found Annabeth standing over him. She had said, You drool when you sleep. She was sentimental that way. What's going on? He asked. Are we there? No, she said, her voice low. It's the middle of the night. You mean? Percy's heart started to race. He realised he was in his pyjamas, in bed. He probably had been drooling, or at least making weird noises as he dreamed. No doubt he had a severe case of pillow hair, and his breath didn't smell great. You sneaked into my cabin? Annabeth rolled her eyes. Percy, you'll be 17 in 2 months. You can't seriously be worried about getting into trouble with Coach Hedge. Have you seen his baseball bat? Besides, seaweed brain, I just thought we could take a walk. We haven't had any time to be together alone. I want to show you something. My favourite place aboard the ship. Percy's pulse was still in overdrive, but it wasn't from fear of getting into trouble. Can I, brush my teeth first? You'd better, Annabeth said, because I'm not kissing you until you do, and brush your hair while you're at it. For a Tratrine, the ship was huge, but it still felt cosy to Percy, like his dorm building back at Yancey Academy, or any of the other boarding schools he'd been kicked out of. Annabeth and he crept downstairs to the second deck, which Percy hadn't explored except for sickbay. She led him past the engine room, which looked like a very dangerous mechanised jungle gym, with pipes and pistons and tubes jutting from a central bronze sphere. Cables resembling giant metal noodles snaked across the floor and ran up the walls. How does that thing even work? Percy asked. No idea, Annabeth said, and I'm the only one besides Leo who can operate it. That's reassuring. It should be fine. It's only threatened to blow up once. You're kidding, I hope. She smiled. Come on. They worked their way past the supply rooms and the armoury, towards the stern of the ship. They reached a set of wooden double doors that opened into a large stable. The room smelled of fresh hay and wool blankets, lining the left wall were 3 empty horse stalls, like the ones they used for Pegasi back at camp. The right wall had 2 empty cages, big enough for large zoo animals. In the centre of the floor was a 20-foot square see-through panel. Far below, the night landscape whisked by, miles of dark countryside crisscrossed with illuminated highways like the strands of a web. A glass-bottomed boat? Percy asked. Annabeth grabbed a blanket from the nearest stable gate and spread it across part of the glass floor. Sit with me. They relaxed on the blanket as if they were having a picnic and watching the world go by below. Leo built the stables so Pegasi could come and go easily, Annabeth said, only he didn't realise that Pegasi prefer to roam free, so the stables are always empty. Percy wondered where Blackjack was, roaming the skies somewhere, hopefully following their progress. Percy's head still throbbed from getting whopped by Blackjack's hoof, but but he didn't hold that against the horse. "What do you mean, come and go easily?" he asked. "Wouldn't a Pegasus have to make it down 2 flights of stairs?" Annabeth rapped her knuckles on the glass. "These are bay doors, like a bomber." Percy gulped. "You mean we're sitting on doors? What if they opened? I suppose we'd fall to our deaths, but they won't open, most likely." "Great." Annabeth laughed. "You know why I like it here? It's not just the view. What does this place remind you of?" Percy looked around. The cages and stables, the celestial bronze lamp hanging from the beam, the smell of hay, and of course Annabeth sitting close to him, her face ghostly and beautiful in the soft amber light. "That zoo truck," Percy decided. "The one we took to Las Vegas." Her smile told him he'd got the answer right. "That was so long ago," Percy said. "We were in bad shape, struggling to get across the country to find that stupid lightning bolt, trapped in a truck with a bunch of mistreated animals. How can you be nostalgic about that?" "Because, Seaweed Brain, it's the first time we really talked, you and me. I told you about my family and—" She took out her camp necklace, strung with her dad's college ring and a colourful clay bead for each year at Camp Half-Blood. Now there was something else on the leather cord, a red coral pendant Percy had given her when they had started dating. He'd brought it from his father's palace at the bottom of the sea. "And," Annabeth continued, "it reminds me how long we've known each other. We were 12, Percy. Can you believe that?" "No," he admitted. "So, you knew you liked me from that moment?" She smirked. "I hated you at first. You annoyed me. Then I tolerated you for a few years, and then—" "Okay, fine." She leaned over and kissed him. A good proper kiss without anyone watching. No Romans everywhere. No screaming satyr chaperones. She pulled away. "I missed you, Percy." Percy wanted to tell her the same thing, but it seemed too small a comment. While he had been on the Roman side, he'd kept himself alive almost solely by thinking of Annabeth. "I missed you" didn't really cover that. He remembered earlier in the night, when Piper had forced the Eidolon to leave his mind. Percy hadn't been aware of its presence until she had used her charm speak. After the Eidolon was gone, he felt as if a hot spike had been removed from his forehead. He hadn't realised how much pain he had been in until the spirit left. Then his thoughts became clearer. His soul settled comfortably back into his body. Sitting here with Annabeth made him feel the same way. The past few months could have been one of his strange dreams. The events at Camp Jupiter seemed as fuzzy and unreal as that fight with Jason, when they had both been controlled by the Eidolons. Yet, he didn't regret the time he'd spent at Camp Jupiter. It had opened his eyes in a lot of ways. "Annabeth," he said hesitantly, "in New Rome, demigods can live their whole lives in peace." Her expression turned guarded. "Rayner explained it to me, but, Percy, you belong at Camp Half-Blood. That other life—" "I know," Percy said, "but while I was there, I saw so many demigods living without fear. Kids going to college, couples getting married and raising families. There's nothing like that at Camp Half-Blood. I kept thinking about you and me, and maybe someday, when this war with the giants is over." It was hard to tell in the golden light, but he thought Annabeth was blushing. "Oh," she said. Percy was afraid he'd said too much. Maybe he'd scared her with his big dreams of the future. She was usually the one with the plans. Percy cursed himself silently. As long as he'd known Annabeth, he still felt like he understood so little about her. Even after they'd been dating several months, their relationship had always felt new and delicate, like a glass sculpture. He was terrified of doing something wrong and breaking it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just had to think of that to keep going, to give me hope. Forget I mentioned—" "No," she said. "No, Percy, gods, that's so sweet. It's just, we may have burned that bridge. If we can't repair things with the Romans, well, the two sets of demigods have never got along. That's why the gods kept us separate. I don't know if we could ever belong there." Percy didn't want to argue, but he couldn't let go of the hope. It felt important, not just for Annabeth and him, but for all other demigods. It had to be possible to belong in two different worlds at once. After all, that's what being a demigod was all about. Not quite belonging in the mortal world or on Mount Olympus, but trying to make peace with both sides of their nature. Unfortunately, that got him thinking about the gods, the war they were facing, and his dream about the twins, Ephialtes and Otis. "I was having a nightmare when you woke me up," he admitted. He told Annabeth what he'd seen. Even the most troubling parts didn't seem to surprise her. She shook her head sadly when he described Nico's imprisonment in the bronze jar. She got an angry glint in her eyes when he told her about the giants planning some sort of Rome-destroying extravaganza that would include their painful deaths as the opening event. "Nico is the bait," she murmured. "Gaia's forces must have captured him somehow, but we don't know exactly where they're holding him." "Somewhere in Rome," Percy said. "Somewhere underground. They made it sound like Nico still had a few days to live, but I don't see how he could hold out so long with no oxygen." 5 more days, according to Nemesis," Annabeth said. "The calends of July. At least the deadline makes sense now." What's a calends? Annabeth smirked like she was pleased they were back in their old familiar pattern, Percy being ignorant, she herself explaining stuff. It's just the Roman term for the first of the month. That's where we get the word calendar. But how can Nico survive that long? We should talk to Hazel. Now? She hesitated. No, it can wait until morning. I don't want to hit her with this news in the middle of the night. The giants mentioned a statue, Percy recalled. Something about a talented friend who was guarding it. Whoever this friend was, she scared Otis. Anyone who can scare a giant. Annabeth gazed down at a highway snaking through dark hills. Percy, have you seen Poseidon lately? Or had any kind of sign from him? He shook his head. Not since... Wow, I guess I haven't thought about it. Not since the end of the Titan War. I saw him at Camp Half-Blood, but that was last August. A sense of dread settled over him. Why? Have you seen Athena? She didn't meet his eyes. A few weeks ago, she admitted. It wasn't good. She didn't seem like herself. Maybe it's the Greek-Roman schizophrenia that Nemesis described. I'm not sure. She said some hurtful things. She said I had failed her. Failed her? Percy wasn't sure he'd heard her right. Annabeth was the perfect demigod child. She was everything a daughter of Athena should be. How could you ever... I don't know, she said miserably. On top of that, I've been having nightmares of my own. They don't make as much sense as yours. Percy waited, but Annabeth didn't share any more details. He wanted to make her feel better and tell her it would be okay, but he knew he couldn't. He wanted to fix everything for both of them so they could have a happy ending. After all these years, even the cruelest gods would have to admit they deserved it. But he had a gut feeling that there was nothing he could do to help Annabeth this time, other than simply be there. Wisdom's daughter walks alone. He felt as trapped and helpless as when he'd sunk into the muskeg. Annabeth managed a faint smile. Some romantic evening, huh? No more bad things until the morning. She kissed him again. We'll figure everything out. I've got your back. For now, that's all that matters. Right, Percy said. No more talk about Gaia rising, Nico being held hostage, the world ending, the giants... Shut up, seaweed brain, she ordered. Just hold me for a while. They sat together cuddling, enjoying each other's warmth. Before Percy knew it, the drone of the ship's engine, the dim light and the comfortable feeling of being with Annabeth made his eyes heavy, and he drifted to sleep. When he woke, daylight was coming through the glass floor, and a boy's voice said, "Oh, you are in so much trouble." Chapter 14. Percy. Percy had seen Frank surrounded by cannibal ogres, facing down an unkillable giant and even unleashing Thanatos, the god of death. But he'd never seen Frank look as terrified as he did now, finding the two of them passed out in the stables. What? Percy rubbed his eyes. Oh, we just fell asleep. Frank swallowed. He was dressed in running shoes, dark cargo pants and a Vancouver Winter Olympics t-shirt with his Roman centurion badge pinned to the neck, which seemed either sad or hopeful to Percy, now that they were renegades. Frank averted his eyes, as if the sight of them together might burn him. Everyone thinks you've been kidnapped, he said. We've been scouring the ship. When Coach Hedge finds out, oh gods, you've been here all night? Frank, Annabeth's ears were as red as strawberries. We just came down here to talk. We fell asleep, accidentally, that's it. Kissed a couple of times, Percy said. Annabeth glared at him. Not helping. We'd better, Frank pointed to the stable doors. We're supposed to meet for breakfast. Would you explain what you did? Didn't do? I really don't want that fawn, Satyr to kill me. Frank ran. When everyone finally gathered in the mess hall, it wasn't quite as bad as Frank had feared. Jason and Piper were mostly relieved. Leo couldn't stop grinning and muttering. Classic, classic. Only Hazel seemed scandalised, maybe because she was from the 1940s. She kept fanning her face and wouldn't meet Percy's eyes. Naturally, Coach Hedge went ballistic, but Percy found it hard to take the satyr seriously since he was barely 5 feet tall. Never in my life, Coach bellowed, waving his bat and knocking over a plate of apples. Against the rules! Irresponsible! Coach, Annabeth said, it was an accident. We were talking, and we fell asleep. Besides, Percy said, you're starting to sound like Terminus. Hedge narrowed his eyes. Is that an insult, Jackson? 'Cause I'll Terminus you, buddy. Percy tried not to laugh. It won't happen again, Coach, I promise. Now, don't we have other things to discuss? Hedge fumed. Fine, but I'm watching you, Jackson, and you, Annabeth Chase. I thought you had more sense. Jason cleared his throat. So, grab some food, everybody. Let's get started. The meeting was like a war council with donuts. Then again, back at Camp Half-Blood, they used to have their most serious discussions around the ping-pong table in the rec room with crackers and cheese whiz, so Percy felt right at home. He told them about his dream, the twin giants planning a reception for them in the underground parking lot, with rocket launchers, Nico D'Angelo trapped in a bronze jar, slowly dying from asphyxiation, with pomegranate seeds at his feet. Hazel choked back a sob. Nico, oh gods, the seeds. You know what they are? Annabeth asked. Hazel nodded. He showed them to me once. They're from our stepmother's garden. Your step... Oh, Percy said. You mean Persephone? Percy had met the wife of Hades once. She hadn't been exactly warm and sunny. He had also been to her underworld garden, a creepy place full of crystal trees and flowers that bloomed blood red and ghost white. The seeds are a last resort food, Hazel said. Percy could tell she was nervous, because all the silver on the table was starting to move towards her. Only children of Hades can eat them. Nico always kept some in case he got stuck somewhere. But if he's really imprisoned... The giants are trying to lure us, Annabeth said. They're assuming we'll try to rescue him. Well, they're right. Hazel looked around the table, her confidence apparently crumbling. Won't we? Yes. Coach Hedge yelled with a mouthful of napkins. It'll involve fighting, right? Hazel, of course we'll help him, Frank said. But how long do we have before... how long can Nico hold out? 1 seed a day, Hazel said miserably. That's if he puts himself in a death trance. A death trance? Annabeth scowled. That doesn't sound fun. It keeps him from consuming all his air, Hazel said, like hibernation or a coma. 1 seed can sustain him 1 day. Barely. And he has 5 seeds left, Percy said. That's 5 days, including today. The giants must have planned it that way, so we'd have to arrive by July 1st, assuming Nico is hidden somewhere in Rome. That's not much time, Piper summed up. She put her hand on Hazel's shoulder. We'll find him. At least we know what the lines of the prophecy mean now. Twins snuff out the angel's breath, who holds the key to endless death. Your brother's last name, D'Angelo. Angelo is Italian for angel. Oh, gods, Hazel muttered. Nico. Percy stared at his jam donut. He had a rocky history with Nico D'Angelo. The guy had once tricked him into visiting Hades' palace, and Percy had ended up in a cell. But most of the time, Nico sided with the good guys. He certainly didn't deserve slow suffocation in a bronze jar, and Percy couldn't stand seeing Hazel in pain. We'll rescue him, he promised her. We have to. The prophecy says he holds the key to endless death. That's right, Piper said encouragingly. Hazel, your brother went searching for the doors of death in the underworld, right? He must have found them. He can tell us where the doors are, Percy said, and how to close them. Hazel took a deep breath. Yes, good. Leo shifted in his chair. One thing. The giants are expecting us to do this, right? So we're walking into a trap. Hazel looked at Leo like he'd made a rude gesture. We have no choice. Don't get me wrong, Hazel. It's just that your brother, Nico, he knew about both camps, right? Well, yes, Hazel said. He's been going back and forth, Leo said, and he didn't tell either side. Jason sat forward, his expression grim. You're wondering if we can trust the guy? So am I. Hazel shot to her feet. I don't believe this. He's my brother. He brought me back from the underworld, and you don't want to help him? Frank put his hand on her shoulder. Nobody's saying that. He glared at Leo. Nobody had better be saying that. Leo blinked. Look, guys, all I mean is... Hazel, Jason said. Leo is raising a fair point. I remember Nico from Camp Jupiter. Now I find out he also visited Camp Half-Blood. That does strike me as, well, a little shady. Do we really know where his loyalties lie? We just have to be careful. Hazel's arms shook. A silver platter zoomed towards her and hit the wall to her left, splattering scrambled eggs. You, the great Jason Grace, the praetor I looked up to. You were supposed to be so fair, such a good leader, and now you... Hazel stomped her foot and stormed out of the mess hall. Hazel, Leo called after her. Ah, geez, I should, You've done enough, Frank growled. He got up to follow her, but Piper gestured for him to wait. Give her time, Piper advised. Then she frowned at Leo and Jason. You guys, that was pretty cold. Jason looked shocked. Cold? I'm just being cautious. Her brother is dying, Piper said. I'll go talk to her, Frank insisted. No, Piper said. Let her cool down first. Trust me on this. I'll go check on her in a few minutes. But... Frank huffed like an irritated bear. Fine, I'll wait. From up above came a whirring sound like a large drill. That's Festus, Leo said. I've got him on autopilot, but we must be nearing Atlanta. I'll have to get up there, assuming we know where to land. Everyone turned to Percy. Jason raised an eyebrow. You're Captain Saltwater. Any ideas from the expert? Was that resentment in his voice? Percy wondered if Jason was secretly miffed about the duel in Kansas. Jason had joked about it, but Percy figured that they both harboured a little grudge. You couldn't put two demigods in a fight and not have them wonder who was stronger. I'm not sure, he admitted. Somewhere central, high up so we can get a good view of the city. Maybe a park with some woods. We don't want to land a warship in the middle of downtown. I doubt even the mist could cover up something that huge. Leo nodded. On it! And he raced for the stairs. Frank settled back in his chair uneasily. Percy felt bad for him. On the trip to Alaska, he had watched Hazel and Frank grow close. He knew how protective Frank felt towards her. He also noticed the baleful look Frank was giving Leo. He decided it might be a good idea to get Frank off the ship for a while. When we land, I'll scout around in Atlanta, Percy said. Frank, I could use your help. You mean turn into a dragon again? Honestly, Percy, I don't want to spend the whole quest being everyone's flying taxi. No, Percy said. I want you with me because you've got the blood of Poseidon. Maybe you can help me figure out where to find salt water. Besides, you're good in a fight. That seemed to make Frank feel a little better. Sure, I guess. Great, Percy said. We should take one more. Annabeth? Oh no, Coach Hedge barked. Young lady, you are grounded. Annabeth stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Excuse me? You and Jackson are not going anywhere together, Hedge insisted. He glared at Percy, daring him to mouth off. I'll go with Frank and Mr. Sneaky Jackson. The rest of you guard the ship and make sure Annabeth doesn't break any more rules. Wonderful, Percy thought. A boy's day out with Frank and a bloodthirsty satyr to find salt water in a landlocked city. This, he said, is going to be so much fun. Chapter 15. Percy. Percy climbed out on deck and said, Wow! They had landed near the summit of a forested hill, a complex of white buildings, like a museum or a university, nestled in a grove of pines to the left. Below them spread the city of Atlanta, a cluster of brown and silver downtown skyscrapers 2 miles away, rising from what looked like an endless flat sprawl of highways, railroad tracks, houses and green swathes of forest. Ah, lovely spot. Coach Hedge inhaled the morning air. Good choice, Valdez. Leo shrugged. I just picked a tall hill. That's a presidential library or something over there. At least that's what Festus says. I don't know about that, Hedge barked. But do you realise what happened on this hill? Frank Zhang, you should know. Frank flinched. I should? A son of Ares stood here, Hedge cried indignantly. I'm Roman, so Mars, actually. Whatever. Famous spot in the American Civil War. I'm Canadian, actually. Whatever. General Sherman, Union leader. He stood on this hill watching the city of Atlanta burn, cut a path of destruction all the way from here to the sea, burning, looting, pillaging. Now there was a demigod. Frank inched away from the satyr. Okay. Percy didn't care much about history, but he wondered whether landing here was a bad omen. He'd heard that most human civil wars started as fights between Greek and Roman demigods. Now they were standing on the site of one such battle. The entire city below them had been levelled on orders of a child of Ares. Percy could imagine some of the kids at Camp Half-Blood giving such a command. Clarice LaRue, for instance, wouldn't hesitate. But he couldn't imagine Frank being so harsh. Anyway, Percy said, let's try not to burn down the city this time. The coach looked disappointed. All right, but where to? Percy pointed towards downtown. When in doubt, start in the middle. Catching a ride there was easier than they thought. The three of them headed to the presidential library, which turned out to be the Carter Center, and asked the staff if they could call a taxi or give them directions to the nearest bus stop. Percy could have summoned Blackjack, but he was reluctant to ask the Pegasus for help so soon after their last disaster. Frank didn't want to polymorph into anything, and besides, Percy was kind of hoping to travel like a regular mortal for a change. One of the librarians, whose name was Esther, insisted on driving them personally. She was so nice about it that Percy thought she must be a monster in disguise, but Hedge pulled him aside and assured him that Esther smiled like a normal human. With a hint of potpourri, he said. Cloves, rose petals, tasty. They piled into Esther's big black Cadillac and drove towards downtown. Esther was so tiny she could barely see over the steering wheel, but that didn't seem to bother her. She muscled her car through traffic while regaling them with stories about the crazy families of Atlanta, the old plantation owners, the founders of Coca-Cola, the sports stars and the CNN news people. She sounded so knowledgeable that Percy decided to try his luck. So, Esther, he said, here's a hard question for you. Saltwater in Atlanta. What's the first thing that comes to mind? The old lady chuckled. Oh, sugar, that's easy. Whale sharks. Frank and Percy exchanged looks. Whale sharks? Frank asked nervously. You have those in Atlanta? At the aquarium, sugar, Esther said. Very famous, right downtown. Is that where you wanted to go? An aquarium. Percy considered that. He didn't know what an ancient Greek sea god would be doing at a Georgia aquarium, but he didn't have any better ideas. Yes, Percy said. That's where we're going. Esther dropped them at the main entrance, where a queue was already forming. She insisted on giving them her cell phone number for emergencies, money for a taxi ride back to the Carter Center, and a jar of homemade peach preserves, which for some reason she kept in a box in her trunk. Frank stuck the jar in his backpack and thanked Esther, who had already switched from calling him Sugar to Son. As she drove away, Frank said, "Are all people in Atlanta that nice?" Hedge grunted. "Hope not. I can't fight them if they're nice. Let's go beat up some whale sharks. They sound dangerous." It hadn't occurred to Percy that they might have to pay admission or stand in line behind a bunch of families and kids from summer camps. Looking at the elementary schoolers in their colourful T-shirts from various day camps, Percy felt a twinge of sadness. He should be at Camp Half-Blood right now, settling into his cabin for the summer, teaching sword-fighting lessons in the arena, planning pranks on the other counsellors. These kids had no idea just how crazy a summer camp could be. He sighed. "Well, I guess we wait in line. Anybody have money?" Frank checked his pockets. 3 denarii from Camp Jupiter, $5 Canadian. Hedge patted his gym shorts and pulled out what he found. 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a rubber band, and score! A piece of celery. He started munching on the celery, eyeing the change and the rubber band like they might be next. "Great," Percy said. His own pockets were empty except for his pen sword, Riptide. He was pondering whether or not they could sneak in somehow, when a woman in blue and green Georgia aquarium shirt came up to them, smiling brightly. "Ah, VIP visitors!" She had perky dimpled cheeks, thick framed glasses, braces and frizzy black hair pulled to the sides in pigtails, so that even though she was probably in her late 20s, she looked like a schoolgirl nerd. Sort of cute, but sort of odd. Along with her Georgia aquarium polo shirt, she wore dark slacks and black trainers, and she bounced on the balls of her feet like she simply couldn't contain her energy. Her name tag read Kate. "You have your payment, I see," she said. "Excellent." "What?" Percy asked. Kate scooped the 3 denarii out of Frank's hand. "Yes, that's fine. Right this way." She spun and trotted off towards the main entrance. Percy looked at Coach Hedge and Frank. "A trap?" "Probably," Frank said. "She's not mortal," Hedge said, sniffing the air. "Probably some sort of goat-eating, demigod-destroying fiend from Tartarus." "No doubt," Percy agreed. "Awesome," Hedge grinned. "Let's go." Kate got them past the ticket queue and into the aquarium with no problem. "Right this way." Kate grinned at Percy. "It's a wonderful exhibit. You won't be disappointed. So rare we get VIPs. You mean demigods?" Frank asked. Kate winked at him impishly and put a finger to her mouth. "So over here is the cold water experience, with your penguins and beluga whales and whatnot. And over there, well, those are some fish, obviously." For an aquarium worker, she didn't seem to know much or care much about the smaller fish. They passed one huge tank full of tropical species, and when Frank pointed to a particular fish and asked what it was, Kate said, "Oh, those are the yellow ones." They passed the gift shop. Frank slowed down to check out a clearance table with clothes and toys. "Take what you want," Kate told him. Frank blinked. "Really? Of course. You're a VIP." Frank hesitated, and then he stuffed some T-shirts in his backpack. "Dude," Percy said, "what are you doing?" "She said I could," Frank whispered. "Besides, I need more clothes. I didn't pack for a long trip." He added a snow globe to his stash, which didn't seem like clothing to Percy. Then Frank picked up a braided cylinder about the size of a candy bar. He squinted at it. "What is?" "Chinese handcuffs," Percy said. Frank, who was Chinese-Canadian, looked offended. "How is this Chinese?" "I don't know," Percy said. "That's just what it's called. It's like a gag gift." "Come along, boys," Kate called from across the hall. "I'll show you later," Percy promised. Frank stuffed the handcuffs in his backpack and they kept walking. They passed through an acrylic tunnel. Fish swam over their heads and Percy felt irrational panic building in his throat. "This is dumb," he told himself. "I've been underwater 1,000,000 times and I'm not even in the water." The real threat was Kate, he reminded himself. Hedge had already detected that she wasn't human. Any minute, she might turn into some horrible creature and attack them. Unfortunately, Percy didn't see much choice but to play along with her VIP tour until they could find the sea god Phorcys, even if they were walking deeper into a trap. They emerged in a viewing room awash with blue light. On the other side of a glass wall was the biggest aquarium tank Percy had ever seen. Cruising in circles were dozens of huge fish, including 2 spotted sharks, each twice Percy's size. They were fat and slow, with open mouths and no teeth. "Whale sharks," Coach Hedge growled. "Now we shall battle to the death." Kate giggled. "Silly satyr. Whale sharks are peaceful. They only eat plankton." Percy scowled. He wondered how Kate knew the coach was a satyr. Hedge was wearing trousers and specially fitted shoes over his hooves, like satyrs usually did to blend in with mortals. His baseball cap covered his horns. The more Kate giggled and acted friendly, the more Percy didn't like her. But Coach Hedge didn't seem fazed. "Peaceful sharks?" the coach said with disgust. "What's the point of that?" Frank read the plaque next to the tank. The only whale sharks in captivity in the world, he mused. That's kind of amazing. Yes, and these are small, Kate said. You should see some of my other babies out in the wild. Your babies? Frank asked. Judging from the wicked glint in Kate's eyes, Percy was pretty sure he didn't want to meet Kate's babies. He decided it was time to get to the point. He didn't want to go any further into this aquarium than he had to. So, Kate, he said, we're looking for a god, named Phorcys. Would you happen to know him? Kate snorted. Know him? He's my brother. That's where we're going, sillies. The real exhibits are right through here. She gestured at the far wall. The solid black surface rippled and another tunnel appeared, leading through a luminous purple tank. Kate strolled inside. The last thing Percy wanted to do was follow, but if Phorcys was really on the other side, and if he had information that would help their quest, Percy took a deep breath and followed his friends into the tunnel. As soon as they entered, Coach Hedge whistled. Now that's interesting. Gliding above them were multicoloured jellyfish the size of trash cans, each with hundreds of tentacles that looked like silky barbed wire. One jellyfish had a paralysed 10-foot-long swordfish tangled in its grasp. The jellyfish slowly wrapped its tendrils tighter and tighter around its prey. Kate beamed at Coach Hedge. You see? Forget the whale sharks, and there's much more. Kate led them into an even larger chamber, lined with more aquariums. On one wall, the glowing red sign proclaimed, Death in the Deep Seas, sponsored by Monster Donut. Percy had to read the sign twice because of his dyslexia, and then twice more to let the message sink in. Monster Donut. Oh yes, Kate said, one of our corporate sponsors. Percy gulped. His last experience with Monster Donut hadn't been pleasant. It had involved acid-spitting serpent heads, much screaming, and a cannon. In one aquarium, a dozen hippocampi, horses with tails of fish, drifted aimlessly. Percy had seen many hippocampi in the wild. He'd even ridden a few, but he had never seen any in an aquarium. He tried to speak with them, but they just floated around, occasionally bumping against the glass. Their minds seemed addled. This isn't right, Percy muttered. He turned and saw something even worse. At the bottom of a smaller tank, two Nereids, female sea spirits, sat cross-legged, facing each other, playing a game of Go Fish. They looked incredibly bored. Their long green hair floated listlessly across their faces. Their eyes were half closed. Percy felt so angry he could hardly breathe. He glared at Kate. How can you keep them here? I know, Kate sighed. They aren't very interesting. We tried to teach them some tricks, but with no luck, I'm afraid. I think you'll like this tank over here much better. Percy started to protest, but Kate had already moved on. Holy mother of goats, cried Coach Hedge. Look at these beauties. He was gawking at two sea serpents, 30-foot-long monsters with glowing blue scales and jaws that could have bitten a whale shark in half. In another tank, peeking out from its cement cave, was a squid the size of an 18-wheeler with a beak like a giant bolt cutter. A third tank had a dozen humanoid creatures with sleek seal bodies, dog-like faces, and human hands. They sat on the sand at the bottom of the tank, building things out of Lego, though the creatures seemed just as Dades as the Nereids. Are those? Percy struggled to form the question. Telkeens, Kate said. Yes, the only ones in captivity. But they fought for Kronos in the last war, Percy said. They're dangerous. Kate rolled her eyes. Well, we couldn't call it Death in the Deep Seas if these exhibits weren't dangerous. Don't worry, we keep them well sedated. Sedated? Frank asked. Is that legal? Kate appeared not to have heard. She kept walking, pointing out other exhibits. Percy looked back at the Telkeens. One was obviously a youngster. He was trying to make a sword out of Lego, but he seemed too groggy to put the pieces together. Percy had never liked sea demons, but now he felt sorry for them. And these sea monsters, Kate narrated up ahead, can grow 500 feet long in the deep ocean. They have over 1,000 teeth. And these, their favourite food is demigod. Demigod? Frank yelped. But they will eat whales or small boats too. Kate turned to Percy and blushed. Sorry, I'm such a monster nerd. I'm sure you know all this, being the son of Poseidon and all. Percy's ears were ringing like alarm bells. He didn't like how much Kate knew about him. He didn't like the way she casually tossed out information about drugging captive creatures, or which of her babies liked to devour demigods. Who are you? He demanded. Does Kate stand for something? Kate! She looked momentarily confused. Then she glanced at her name tag. Oh! She laughed. No, it's Hello, said a new voice, booming through the aquarium. A small man scuttled out of the darkness. He walked sideways on bowed legs, like a crab. His back hunched, his arms raised on either side like he was holding invisible plates. He wore a wetsuit that was several horrible shades of green. Glittery silver words printed down the side read, "Porky's Follies." A headset microphone was clamped over his greasy, wiry hair. His eyes were milky blue, one higher than the other, and though he smiled, he didn't look friendly, more like his face was being peeled back in a wind tunnel. "Visitors," the man said, the word thundering through the microphone. He had a DJ's voice, deep and resonant, which did not match his appearance at all. "Welcome to Forsyth's Follies." He swept his arms in one direction, as if directing their attention to an explosion. Nothing happened. "Curse it," the man grumbled. "Tell Keynes, that's your cue. I wave my hands and you leap energetically in your tank. Do a synchronized double spin and land in a pyramid formation. We practiced this." The sea demons paid him no attention. Coach Hedge leaned towards the crab man and sniffed his glittery wetsuit. "Nice outfit." He didn't sound like he was kidding. Of course, the satyr wore gym uniforms for fun. "Thank you," the man beamed. "I am Forsyth." Frank shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Why does your suit say Porky?" Forsyth snarled, "Stupid uniform company. They can't get anything right." Kate tapped her name tag. "I told them my name was Kato. They misspelled it as Kate. My brother, well, now he's Porky." "I am not," the man snapped. "I'm not even a little Porky. The name doesn't work with Follies either. What kind of show is called Porky's Follies? But you folks don't want to hear us complain. Behold, the wondrous majesty of the great killer squid." He gestured dramatically towards the squid tank. This time fireworks shot off in front of the glass right on cue, sending up geysers of golden sparkles. Music swelled from the loudspeakers. The lights brightened and revealed the wondrous majesty of an empty tank. The squid had apparently skulked back into its cave. "Curse it!" Forsyth yelled again. He wheeled on his sister. "Keto, training the squid was your job. Juggling, I said. Maybe a bit of fresh rending for the finale. Is that too much to ask?" "He's shy," Keto said defensively. "Besides, each of his tentacles has 62 razor-like barbs that have to be sharpened daily." She turned towards Frank. "Did you know the monstrous squid is the only beast known to eat demigods whole, armour and all, without getting indigestion? It's true." Frank stumbled away from her, hugging his gut as if making sure he was still in one piece. "Keto," Porky snapped, literally since he clicked his fingers to his thumbs like crab claws. "You'll bore our guests with so much information. Less education, more entertainment. We've discussed this. But no buts. We're here to present Death in the Deep Seas, sponsored by Monster Donut." The last words reverberated through the room with an extra echo. Lights flashed. Smoke clouds billowed from the floor, making donut-shaped rings that smelled like real donuts. "Available at the concession stand," Forsyth advised. "But you've spent your hard-earned denarii to get the VIP tour, and so you shall. Come with me." Hold it," Percy said. Forsyth's smile melted in an ugly way. "Yes? You're a sea god, aren't you?" Percy asked. "Son of Gaia." The crab man sighed. 5,000 years, and I'm still known as Gaia's little boy. Never mind that I'm one of the oldest sea gods in existence. Older than your upstart father, by the way. I'm god of the hidden depths, lord of watery terrors, father of 1,000 monsters. But no, nobody even knows me. I make one little mistake supporting the Titans in their war, and I'm exiled from the ocean to Atlanta of all places. "We thought the Olympians said Atlantis," Keto explained. "Their idea of a joke, I guess, sending us here instead." Percy narrowed his eyes. "And you're a goddess?" "Keto, yes," she smiled happily. "Goddess of sea monsters, naturally. Whales, sharks, squids, and other giant sea life. But my heart always belonged to the monsters. Did you know that young sea serpents can regurgitate the flesh of their victims and keep themselves fed for up to 6 years on the same meal? It's true." Frank was still clutching his stomach like he was going to be sick. Coach Hedge whistled. 6 years? That's fascinating." "I know," Keto beamed. "And how exactly does a killer squid rend the flesh of its victims?" Hedge asked. "I love nature." "Oh, well, stop!" Forsyth demanded. "You're ruining the show. Now witness our Nereid gladiators fight to the death." A mirrored disco ball descended into the Nereid exhibit, making the water dance with multicoloured light. 2 swords fell to the bottom and plunked in the sand. The Nereids ignored them and kept playing Go Fish. "Curse it!" Forsyth stomped his legs sideways. Keto grimaced at Coach Hedge. "Don't mind Porky. He's such a windbag. Come with me, my fine satyr. I'll show you full-coloured diagrams of the monster's hunting habits." "Excellent." Before Percy could object, Keto led Coach Hedge away through a maze of aquarium glass, leaving Frank and him alone with the crabby sea god. A bead of sweat traced its way down Percy's neck. He exchanged a nervous look with Frank. This felt like a divide-and-conquer strategy. He didn't even see any way the encounter was going to end well. Part of him wanted to attack Forces now. At least that might give him the element of surprise. But they hadn't found out any useful information yet. Percy wasn't sure he could find Coach Hedge again. He wasn't even sure he could find the exit. Forces must have read his expression. "Oh, it's fine," the god assured him. "Keto might be a little boring, but she'll take good care of your friend, and honestly, the best part of the tour is still to come." Percy tried to think, but he was starting to get a headache. He wasn't sure if it was from yesterday's head injury, Forces' special effects, or Keto's lectures on nauseating sea monster facts. "So," he managed, "Dionysus sent us here." "Bacchus," Frank corrected. "Right." Percy tried to keep his annoyance in check. He could barely remember one name for each god. Two was pushing it. The wine god, whatever. He looked at Forces. "Bacchus said you might know what your mum Gaia is up to, and these twin giant brothers of yours, Ephialtes and Otis, and if you happen to know anything about this mark of Athena." "Bacchus thought I would help you?" Forces asked. "Well, yeah," Percy said. "I mean, you're Forces. Everybody talks about you." Forces tilted his head so that his mismatched eyes almost lined up. "They do?" "Of course, don't they, Frank?" "Oh, sure," Frank said. "People talk about you all the time." "What do they say?" the god asked. Frank looked uncomfortable. "Well, you have great pyrotechnics and a good announcer's voice and a disco ball." "It's true." Forces clacked his fingers and thumbs excitedly. "I also have the largest collection of captive sea monsters in the world." "And you know stuff," Percy added, "like about the twins and what they're up to." "The twins?" Forces made his voice echo. Sparklers blazed to life in front of the sea serpent tank. "Yes, I know all about Ephialtes and Otis. Those wannabes, they never fitted in with the other giants, too puny, and those snakes for feet." "Snakes for feet?" Percy remembered the long curly shoes the twins had been wearing in his dream. Yes, Forces said impatiently. "They know they couldn't get in by on their own strength, so they decided to go for drama, illusions, stage tricks, that sort of thing. You see, Gaia shaped her giant children with specific enemies in mind. Each giant was born to kill a certain god. Ephialtes and Otis, well, together, they were sort of the anti-Dionysus." Percy tried to wrap his mind around that idea. "So they want to replace all wine with cranberry juice or something?" The sea god snorted. "Nothing like that. Ephialtes and Otis always wanted to do things better, flashier, more spectacular. Oh, of course they wanted to kill Dionysus, but first they wanted to humiliate him by making his revelries look tame." Frank glanced at the sparklers. "By using stuff like fireworks and disco balls?" Forces' mouth stretched into that wind tunnel smile. "Exactly. I taught the twins everything they know, or at least I tried to. They never listened. Their first big trick, they tried to reach Olympus by piling mountains on top of one another. It was just an illusion, of course. I told them it was ridiculous. They should start small, I said, sawing each other in half, pulling gorgons out of a hat, that sort of thing, and matching sequined outfits. Twins need those." "Good advice," Percy agreed. "And now the twins are—" "Oh, preparing for their doomsday show in Rome," Forces sneered. "It's one of Mother's silly ideas. They're keeping some prisoner in a large bronze jar." He turned towards Frank. "You're a child of Ares, aren't you? You've got that smell. The twins imprisoned your father the same way once." "Child of Mars," Frank corrected. "Wait, these giants trapped my dad in a bronze jar?" "Yes, another stupid stunt," said the sea god. "How can you show off your prisoner if he's in a bronze jar? No entertainment value. Not like my lovely specimens." He gestured to the hippocampi, who were bumping their heads apathetically against the glass. Percy tried to think. He felt like the lethargy of the addled sea creatures was starting to affect him. "You said this doomsday show was Gaia's idea." "Well, Mother's plans always have lots of layers," he laughed. "The Earth has layers. I suppose that makes sense." "Uh-huh," Percy said. "And so her plan?" "Oh, she's put out a general bounty on some group of demigods," Forces said. "She doesn't really care who kills them, as long as they're killed. Well, I take that back. She was very specific that 2 must be spared, 1 boy and 1 girl. Tartarus only knows why. At any rate, the twins have their little show planned, hoping it will lure these demigods to Rome. I suppose the prisoner of the jar is a friend of theirs, or some such. That, or perhaps they think this group of demigods will be foolish enough to come into their territory, searching for the mark of Athena." Forces elbowed Frank in the ribs. "Ha! Good luck with that, eh?" Frank laughed nervously. "Yeah. Ha, that would be really dumb because, Forces narrowed his eyes. Percy slipped his hand into his pocket. He closed his fingers around Riptide. Even this old sea god must be smart enough to realise they were the demigods with the bounty on their heads. But Forces just grinned and elbowed Frank again. "Ha! Good one, child of Mars. I suppose you're right. No point talking about it. Even if the demigods found that map in Charleston, they'd never make it to Rome alive. Yes, the map in Charleston, Frank said loudly, giving Percy a wide-eyed look to make sure he hadn't missed the information. He couldn't have been more obvious if he'd held up a large sign that read, "Clue!" "But enough boring educational stuff," Forces said. "You've paid for the VIP treatment. Won't you please let me finish the tour? The free denarii entrance fee is non-refundable, you know." Percy wasn't excited about more fireworks, donut-scented smoke, or depressing captive sea creatures, but he glanced at Frank and decided they'd better humour the crabby old god, at least until they found Coach Hedge and got safely to the exit. Besides, they might be able to get more information out of Forces. "Afterwards," Percy said, "can we ask questions?" "Of course! I'll tell you everything you need to know." Forces clapped his hands twice. On the wall under the glowing red sign, a new tunnel appeared, leading into another tank. "Walk this way!" Forces scuttled sideways through the tunnel. Frank scratched his head. "Do we have to?" He turned sideways. "It's just a figure of speech, man," Percy said. "Come on." Chapter 16. Percy. The tunnel ran along the floor of a gymnasium-sized tank. Except for water and some cheap decorations, it seemed majestically empty. Percy guessed there was about 50,000 gallons of water over their heads. If the tunnel were to shatter for some reason. No big deal, Percy thought. I've been surrounded by water thousands of times. This is my home court. But his heart was pounding. He remembered sinking into the old Alaskan bog, black mud covering his eyes, mouth and nose. Forces stopped in the middle of the tunnel and spread his arms proudly. "Beautiful exhibit, isn't it?" Percy tried to distract himself by concentrating on details. In one corner of the tank, snuggled in a forest of fake kelp, was a life-size plastic gingerbread cottage with bubbles coming out of the chimney. In the opposite corner, a plastic sculpture of a guy in an old-fashioned diving suit knelt beside a treasure chest, which popped open every few seconds, spewed bubbles and closed again. Littered across the white sand floor were glass marbles the size of bowling balls and a strange assortment of weapons like tridents and spear guns. Outside the tank's display wall was an amphitheatre with seating for several hundred. "What do you keep in here?" Frank asked. "Giant killer goldfish?" Forces raised his eyebrows. "Oh, that would be good, but no, Frank Zhang, descendant of Poseidon. This tank is not for goldfish." At descendant of Poseidon, Frank flinched. He stepped back, gripping his backpack like a mace he was prepared to swing. A sense of dread trickled down Percy's throat like cough syrup. Unfortunately, it was a feeling he was used to. "How do you know Frank's last name?" he demanded. "How do you know he's descended from Poseidon?" "Well," Forces shrugged, trying to look modest. "It was probably in the descriptions Gaia provided, you know, for the bounty, Percy Jackson." Percy uncapped his pen. Instantly, Riptide appeared in his hand. "Don't double-cross me, Forces. You promised me answers." "After the VIP treatment, yes," Forces agreed. "I promised to tell you everything you need to know. The thing is, however, you don't really need to know anything." His grotesque smile stretched wide. "You see, even if you made it to Rome, which is quite unlikely, you'd never defeat my giant brothers without a god fighting at your side. And what god would help you? So I have a better plan. You're not leaving. You're VIPs. Very important prisoners." Percy lunged. Frank hurled his backpack at the sea god's head. Forces simply disappeared. The god's voice reverberated through the aquarium sound system, echoing down the tunnel. "Yes, good. Fighting is good. You see, Mother never trusted me with big assignments, but she did agree that I could keep anything I caught. You two will make an excellent exhibit. The only demigod spawn of Poseidon in captivity. Demigod terrors. Yes, I like that. We already have sponsorship lined up with Bargain Mart. You can fight each other every day at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m, with an evening show at 7 p.m. "You're crazy," Frank yelled. "Don't sell yourself short," Forces said. "You'll be our biggest draw." Frank ran for the exit, only to slam into a glass wall. Percy ran the other way and found it blocked as well. Their tunnel had become a bubble. He put his hand against the glass and realised it was softening, melting like ice. Soon the water would come crashing in. "We won't cooperate," he shouted. "Oh, I'm optimistic," the sea god's voice boomed. "If you won't fight each other at first, no problem. I can send in fresh sea monsters every day. After you get used to the food here, you'll probably be sedated and will follow directions. Believe me, you'll come to love your new home." Over Percy's head, the glass dome cracked and began to leak. "I'm the son of Poseidon." Percy tried to keep the fear out of his voice. "You can't imprison me in water. This is where I'm strongest." Forces' laugh seemed to come from all around them. "What a coincidence. It's also where I'm strongest. This tank is specially designed to contain demigods. Now have fun, you two. I'll see you at feeding time." The glass dome shattered and the water crashed in. Percy held his breath until he couldn't stand it. When he finally filled his lungs with water, it felt like normal breathing. The water pressure didn't bother him. His clothes didn't even get wet. His underwater abilities were as good as ever. "It's just a stupid phobia," he assured himself. "I'm not going to drown." Then he remembered Frank, and he immediately felt a surge of panic and guilt. Percy had been so worried about himself that he'd forgotten his friend was only a distant descendant of Poseidon. Frank couldn't breathe underwater. But where was he? Percy turned a full circle. Nothing. Then he glanced up. Hovering above him was a giant goldfish. Frank had turned clothes, backpack and all, into a koi the size of a teenage boy. "Dude!" Percy sent his thoughts through the water, the way he spoke with other sea creatures. "A goldfish?" Frank's voice came back in time. "I freaked. We were talking about goldfish, so it was on my mind. Sue me." "I'm having a telepathic conversation with a giant koi," Percy said. "Great. Can you turn into something more useful?" Silence. Maybe Frank was concentrating, though it was impossible to tell, since koi don't have many expressions. "Sorry," Frank sounded embarrassed. "I'm stuck. That happens sometimes when I panic." "Fine." Percy gritted his teeth. "Let's figure out how to escape." Frank swam around the tank and reported no exits. The top was covered with celestial bronze mesh, like the curtains that rolled down over closed storefronts at the mall. Percy tried to cut through with Riptide, but he couldn't make a dent. He tried to smash the glass wall with his sword hilt. Again, no luck. Then he repeated his efforts with several of the weapons lying around the bottom of the tank and managed to break 3 tridents, a sword and a spear gun. Finally, he tried to control the water. He wanted it to expand and break the tank, or explode out of the top. The water didn't obey. Maybe it was enchanted or under the power of forces. Percy concentrated until his ears popped, but the best he could do was to blow the lid off the plastic treasure chest. "Well, that's it," he thought dejectedly. "I'll have to live in a plastic gingerbread house the rest of my life, fighting my giant goldfish friend and waiting for feeding time." Forces had promised they'd learn to love it. Percy thought about the dazed Telkeens, the Nereids, and the Hippocampi, all swimming in bored, lazy circles. The thought of ending up like that didn't help to lower his anxiety level. He wondered if Forces was right. Even if they managed to escape, how could they defeat the giants if the gods were all incapacitated? Bacchus might be able to help. He had killed the twin giants once before, but he would only join the fight if he got an impossible tribute, and the idea of giving Bacchus any kind of tribute made Percy want to gag himself with a monster donut. "Look," Frank said. Outside the glass, Cato was leading Coach Hedge through the amphitheatre, lecturing him on something while the coach nodded and admired the stadium seating. "Coach!" Percy yelled. Then he realised it was hopeless. The coach couldn't hear telepathic yelling. Frank bumped his head against the glass. Hedge didn't seem to notice. Cato walked him briskly across the amphitheatre. She didn't even look through the glass, probably because she assumed the tank was still empty. She pointed to the far end of the room as if saying, "Come on, more gruesome sea monsters this way." Percy realised he only had a few seconds before the coach would be gone. He swam after them, but the water didn't help him move as it usually did. In fact, it seemed to be pushing him back. He dropped Riptide and used both arms. Coach Hedge and Cato were 5 feet from the exit. In desperation, Percy scooped up a giant marble and hurled it underhanded like a bowling ball. It hit the glass with a thunk, not nearly loud enough to attract attention. Percy's heart sank, but Coach Hedge had the ears of a satyr. He glanced over his shoulder. When he saw Percy, his expression went through several changes in a matter of microseconds. Incomprehension, surprise, outrage, and then a mask of calm. Before Cato could notice, Hedge pointed towards the top of the amphitheatre. It looked like he might be screaming, "Gods of Olympus, what is that?" Cato turned. Coach Hedge promptly took off his fake foot and ninja kicked her in the back of the head with his goat hoof. Cato crumpled to the floor. Percy winced. His own recently whopped head throbbed in sympathy, but he had never been happier to have a chaperone who liked mixed martial arts cage matches. Hedge ran to the glass. He held up his palms like, "What are you doing in there, Jackson?" Percy pounded his fist on the glass and mouthed, "Break it!" Hedge yelled a question that might have been, "Where's Frank?" Percy pointed at the giant koi. Frank waved his left dorsal fin. "Sup?" Behind Hedge, the sea goddess began to move. Percy pointed frantically. Hedge shook his leg like he was warming up his kicking hoof, but Percy waved his arms. No! They couldn't keep whopping Cato on the head forever. Since she was immortal, she wouldn't stay down, and he wouldn't get them out of this tank. It was only a matter of time before Forces came back to check on them. "On 3, Percy mouthed, holding up 3 fingers and then gesturing at the glass. "All of us hit at the same time." Percy had never been good at charades, but Hedge nodded like he understood. Hitting things was a language the satyr knew well. Percy hefted another giant marble. Frank, we'll need you too. Can you change form yet? Maybe back to human. Human is fine, just hold your breath if this works. Cato rose to her knees. No time to waste. Percy counted on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Frank turned to human and shoved his shoulder against the glass. The coach did a Chuck Norris roundhouse kick with his hoof. Percy used all his strength to slam the marble into the wall. But he did more than that. He called on the water to obey him, and this time he refused to take no for an answer. He felt all the pent-up pressure inside the tank, and he put it to use. Water liked to be free. Given time, water could overcome any barrier, and it hated to be trapped, just like Percy. He thought about getting back to Annabeth. He thought about destroying this horrible prison for sea creatures. He thought about shoving Forsyth's microphone down his ugly throat. 50,000 gallons of water responded to his anger. The glass wall cracked, fracture lines zigzagged from the point of impact, and suddenly the tank burst. Percy was sucked out in a torrent of water. He tumbled across the amphitheatre floor with Frank, some large marbles and a clump of plastic seaweed. Cato was just getting to her feet when the diver statue slammed into her like it wanted a hug. Coach Hedge spat salt water. Pans, pipes, Jackson! What were you doing in there? Forsyth, Percy spluttered. Trap! Run! Alarms blared as they fled the exhibits. They ran past the Nereid's tank, then the Telkeens. Percy wanted to free them, but how? They were drugged and sluggish, and they were sea creatures. They wouldn't survive unless he found a way to transport them to the ocean. Besides, if Forsyth caught them, Percy was pretty sure the sea god's power would overcome his, and Cato would be after them too, ready to feed them to her sea monsters. I'll be back, Percy promised, but if the creatures in the exhibits could hear him, they gave no sign. Over the sound system, Forsyth's voice boomed, Percy Jackson! Flash pots and sparklers exploded randomly. Donut-scented smoke filled the halls. Dramatic music, 5 or 6 different tracks, blared simultaneously from the speakers. Lights popped and caught fire as the special effects in the building were triggered at once. Percy, Coach Hedge and Frank stumbled out of the glass tunnel and found themselves back in the whale shark room. The mortal section of the aquarium was filled with screaming crowds, families and day camp groups, running in every direction while the staff raced around frantically, trying to assure everyone it was just a faulty alarm system. Percy knew better. He and his friends joined the mortals and ran for the exit. Chapter 17. Annabeth. Annabeth was trying to cheer up Hazel, regaling her with Percy's greatest seaweed brain moments, when Frank stumbled down the hall and burst into her cabin. Where's Leo? He gasped. Take off! Take off! Both girls shot to their feet. Where's Percy? Annabeth demanded. And the goat? Frank grabbed his knees, trying to breathe. His clothes were stiff and damp, like they'd been washed in pure starch. On deck. They're fine. We're being followed. Annabeth pushed past him and took the stairs 3 at a time. Hazel right behind her and Frank trailing, still gasping for air. Percy and Hedge lay on the deck, looking exhausted. Hedge was missing his shoes. He grinned at the sky, muttering, Awesome. Awesome. Percy was covered with nicks and scratches like he jumped through a window. He didn't say anything, but he grasped Annabeth's hand weakly, as if to say, Be right with you, as soon as the world stops spinning. Leo, Piper and Jason, who'd been eating in the mess hall, came rushing up the stairs. What? Leo cried, holding a half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich. Can't a guy even take a lunch break? What's wrong? Followed, Frank yelled again. Followed by what? Jason asked. I don't know, Frank panted. Whales? Sea monsters? Maybe Kate and Porky? Annabeth wanted to strangle the guy, but she wasn't sure her hands would fit around his thick neck. That makes absolutely no sense. Leo, you'd better get us out of here. Leo put his sandwich between his teeth, pirate style, and ran for the helm. Soon the Argo 2 was rising into the sky. Annabeth manned the aft crossbow. She saw no sign of pursuit by whales or otherwise, but Percy, Frank and Hedge didn't start to recover until the Atlanta skyline was a hazy smudge in the distance. Charleston, Percy said, hobbling around the deck like an old man. He still sounded pretty shaken up. Set course for Charleston. Charleston? Jason said the name as if it brought back bad memories. What exactly did you find in Atlanta? Frank unzipped his backpack and started bringing out souvenirs. Some peach preserves, a couple of T-shirts, a snow globe and, these not really Chinese handcuffs. Annabeth forced herself to stay calm. How about you start from the top? Of the story, not the backpack. They gathered on the quarterdeck so Leo could hear the conversation as he navigated. Percy and Frank took turns relating what had happened at the Georgia Aquarium, with Coach Hedge interjecting from time to time. That was awesome, or then I kicked her in the head. At least the coach seemed to have forgotten about Percy and Annabeth falling asleep in the stable the night before. But judging from Percy's story, Annabeth had worse problems to worry about than being grounded. When Percy explained about the captive sea creatures in the aquarium, she understood why he seemed so upset. "That's terrible," she said. "We need to help them." "We will," Percy promised. "In time, but I have to figure out how. I wish—" He shook his head. "Never mind. First we have to deal with this bounty on our heads." Coach Hedge had lost interest in the conversation, probably because it was no longer about him, and wandered towards the bow of the ship, practicing his roundhouse kicks and complimenting himself on his technique. Annabeth gripped the hilt of her dagger. "A bounty on our heads, as if we didn't attract enough monsters already." "Do we get wanted posters?" Leo asked. "And do they have our bounties, like broken down on a price list?" Hazel wrinkled her nose. "What are you talking about?" "Just curious how much I'm going for these days," Leo said. "I mean, I can understand not being as pricey as Percy or Jason maybe, but am I worth like 2 francs or 3 francs? "Hey," Frank complained. "Knock it off," Annabeth ordered. "At least we know our next step is to go to Charleston. We find this map." Piper leaned against the control panel. She'd done her braid with white feathers today, which looked good with her dark brown hair. Annabeth wondered how she found the time. Annabeth could barely remember to brush her hair. "A map," Piper said. "But a map to what?" "The mark of Athena." Percy looked cautiously at Annabeth, like he was afraid he'd overstepped. She must have been putting out a strong "I don't want to talk about it" vibe. "Whatever that is," he continued, "we know it leads to something important in Rome, something that might heal the rift between the Romans and Greeks." "Giant's Bane," Hazel added. Percy nodded, and in my dream the twin giants said something about a statue. Frank rolled his not exactly Chinese handcuffs between his fingers. "According to Forsyth, we'd have to be insane to try to find it. But what is it?" Everything and everyone looked at Annabeth. Her scalp tingled, as if the thoughts in her brain were agitating to get out. A statue. Athena. Greek and Roman. Her nightmares and her argument with her mum. She saw how the pieces were coming together, but she couldn't believe it was true. The answer was too big, too important, and much too scary. She noticed Jason studying her, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking, and didn't like it any more than she did. Again, she couldn't help but wonder, why does this guy make me so nervous? Is he really on my side? Or maybe that was her mum talking. I'm close to an answer," she said. "I'll know more if we find this map. Jason, the way you reacted to the name Charleston. Have you been there before?" Jason glanced uneasily at Piper, though Annabeth wasn't sure why. "Yeah," he admitted. "Raynor and I did a quest there about a year ago. We were salvaging Imperial gold weapons from the CSS Hunley." "The what?" Piper asked. "Whoa," Leo said. "That's the first successful military submarine from the Civil War. I always wanted to see that." "It was designed by Roman demigods," Jason said. "It held a secret stash of Imperial gold torpedoes until we rescued them and brought them back to Camp Jupiter." Hazel crossed her arms. "So the Romans fought on the Confederate side. As a girl whose grandmother was a slave, can I just say, not cool?" Jason put his hands in front of him, palms up. "I personally was not alive then, and it wasn't all Greeks on one side and all Romans on the other. But yes, not cool. Sometimes demigods make bad choices." He looked sheepishly at Hazel, like sometimes we're too suspicious, and we speak without thinking. Hazel stared at him. Slowly it seemed to dawn on her that he was apologising. Jason elbowed Leo. "Ow!" Leo yelped. Bad choices, like not trusting people's brothers who, might need saving. Hypothetically speaking." Hazel pursed her lips. "Fine, back to Charleston. Are you saying we should check that submarine again?" Jason shrugged. "Well, I can think of 2 places in Charleston we might search. The museum where they keep the Hunley, that's one of them. It has a lot of relics from the Civil War. A map could be hidden in one. I know the layout. I could lead a team inside." "I'll go," Leo said. "That sounds cool." Jason nodded. He turned to Frank, who was trying to pull his fingers out of the Chinese handcuffs. "You should come too, Frank. We might need you." Frank looked surprised. "Why? Not like I was much good at the aquarium." "You did fine," Percy assured him. "It took all 3 of us to break that glass." "Besides, you're a child of Mars," Jason said. "The ghosts of defeated causes are bound to serve you, and the museum in Charleston has plenty of Confederate ghosts. We'll need you to keep them in line." Frank gulped. Annabeth remembered Percy's comment about Frank turning into a giant goldfish, and she resisted the urge to smile. She would never be able to look at this big guy again without seeing him as a koi. "Okay," Frank relented. "Sure." He frowned at his fingers, trying to pull them out of the trap. How do you—" Leo chuckled. "Man, you've never seen these before. There's a simple trick to getting out." Frank tugged again with no luck. Even Hazel was trying not to laugh. Frank grimaced with concentration. Suddenly he disappeared. On the deck, where he'd been standing, a green iguana crouched next to an empty set of Chinese handcuffs. Well done, Frank Zhang, Leo said dryly, doing his impression of Chiron the Centaur. That is exactly how people beat Chinese handcuffs. They turn into iguanas. Everybody busted out laughing. Frank turned back to human, picked up the handcuffs and shoved them in his backpack. He managed an embarrassed smile. Anyway, he said, clearly anxious to change the subject. The museum is one place to search, but, Jason, you said there were two? Jason's smile faded. Whatever he was thinking about, Annabeth could tell it wasn't pleasant. Yeah, he said. The other place is called the Battery. It's a park right by the harbour. The last time I was there, with Raina. He glanced at Piper and then rushed on. We saw something in the park. A ghost or some sort of spirit, like a Southern belle from the Civil War, glowing and floating along. We tried to approach it, but it disappeared whenever we got close. Then Raina had this feeling. She said she should try it alone. Like maybe it would only talk to a girl. She went up to the spirit by herself, and sure enough, it spoke to her. Everyone waited. What did it say? Annabeth asked. Raina wouldn't tell me, Jason admitted. But it must have been important. She seemed shaken up. Maybe she got a prophecy or some bad news. Raina never acted the same around me after that. Annabeth considered that. After their experience with the Eidolons, she didn't like the idea of approaching a ghost, especially one that changed people with bad news or prophecies. On the other hand, her mum was the goddess of knowledge, and the knowledge was the most powerful weapon. Annabeth couldn't turn down a possible source of information. A girl's adventure then, Annabeth said. Piper and Hazel can come with me. Both nodded, though Hazel looked nervous. No doubt her time in the underworld had given her enough ghost experiences for 2 lifetimes. Piper's eyes flashed defiantly, like anything Raina could do, she could do. Annabeth realised that if 6 of them went on these 2 quests, it would leave Percy alone on the ship with Coach Hedge, which was maybe not a situation a caring girlfriend should put him in. Nor was she eager to let Percy out of her sight again, not after they'd been apart for so many months. On the other hand, Percy looked so troubled by his experience with those imprisoned sea creatures, she thought maybe he could use a rest. She met his eyes, asking him a silent question. He nodded as if to say, yeah, it'll be fine. So that's settled. Annabeth turned to Leo, who was studying his console, listening to Festus creak and click over the intercom. Leo, how long until we reach Charleston? Good question, he muttered. Festus just detected a large group of eagles behind us. Long-range radar, still not in sight. Piper leaned over the console. Are you sure they're Roman? Leo rolled his eyes. No, Pipes. It could be a random group of giant eagles flying in perfect formation. Of course they're Roman. I suppose we could turn this ship around and fight. Which would be a very bad idea, Jason said, and remove any doubt that we're enemies of Rome. Or, I've got another idea, Leo said. If we went straight to Charleston, we could be there in a few hours, but the eagles would overtake us and things would get complicated. Instead, we could send out a decoy to trick the eagles. We take the ship on a detour, go the long way to Charleston, get there tomorrow morning. Hazel started to protest, but Leo raised his hand. I know. Nico's in trouble and we have to hurry. It's June 27th, Hazel said. After today, 4 more days, then he dies. I know, but this might throw the Romans off our trail. We still should have enough time to reach Rome. Hazel scowled. When you say should have enough, Leo shrugged. How do you feel about barely enough? Hazel put her face in her hands for a count of 3. Sounds about typical for us. Annabeth decided to take that as a green light. Okay, Leo, what kind of decoy are we talking about? I'm so glad you asked. He punched a few buttons on the console, rotated the turntable, and repeatedly pressed the A button on his Wii controller really, really fast. He called into the intercom. Buford, report for duty, please. Frank took a step back. There's somebody else on the ship. Who is Buford? A puff of steam shot from the stairwell, and Leo's automatic table climbed on deck. And Annabeth hadn't seen much of Buford during the trip. He mostly stayed in the engine room. Leo insisted that Buford had a secret crush on the engine. He was a 3-legged table with a mahogany top. His bronze base had several drawers, spinning gears, and a set of steam vents. Buford was toting a bag like a mail sack tied to one of his legs. He clattered to the helm and made a sound like a train whistle. This is Buford, Leo announced. You name your furniture? Frank asked. Leo snorted. Man, you just wish you had furniture this cool. Buford, are you ready for Operation End Table? Buford spewed steam. He stepped to the railing. His mahogany top split into 4 pie slices, which elongated into wooden blades. The blades spun and Buford took off. A helicopter table, Percy muttered. Gotta admit, that's cool. What's in the bag? Dirty demigod laundry, Leo said. Hope you don't mind, Frank. Frank choked. What? I'll throw the eagles. It'll throw the eagles off our scent. Those were my only extra jeans. Leo shrugged. I asked Buford to get them laundered and folded while he's out. Hopefully he will." He rubbed his hands and grinned. "Well, I call that a good day's work. I'm going to calculate our detour route now. See you all at dinner." Percy passed out early, which left Annabeth with nothing to do in the evening except stare at her computer. She'd brought Daedalus's laptop with her, of course. 2 years ago she'd inherited the machine from the greatest inventor of all time, and it was loaded with invention ideas, schematics and diagrams, most of which Annabeth was still trying to figure out. After 2 years, a typical laptop would have been out of date, but Annabeth figured Daedalus's machine was still about 50 years ahead of its time. It could expand to a full-size laptop, shrink into a tablet computer, or fold into a wafer of metal smaller than a cell phone. It ran faster than any computer she'd ever had, could access satellites or Hephaestus TV broadcasts from Mount Olympus, and ran custom-made programs that could do just about anything except tie shoelaces. There might have been an app for that too, but Annabeth hadn't found it yet. She sat on her bunk, using one of Daedalus's 3D rendering programs to study a model of the Parthenon in Athens. She'd always yearned to visit it, both because she loved architecture and because it was the most famous temple to her mother. Now she might get her wish, if they lived long enough to reach Greece. But the more she thought about the mark of Athena and the old Roman legend Rayner had mentioned, the more nervous she got. She didn't want to, but she recalled her argument with her mother. Even after so many weeks, the words still stung. Annabeth had been riding the subway back from the Upper East Side after visiting Percy's mum. During those long months when Percy was missing, Annabeth made the trip at least once a week, partly to give Sally Jackson and her husband Paul an update on the search, and partly because Annabeth and Sally needed to lift each other's spirits and convince one another that Percy would be fine. The spring had been especially hard. By then, Annabeth had reason to hope Percy was alive, since Hera's plan seemed to involve sending him to the Roman side. But she couldn't be sure where he was. Jason had remembered his old camp's location more or less, but all the Greeks' magic, even that of the campers of Hecate's cabin, couldn't confirm that Percy was there or anywhere. He seemed to have disappeared from the planet. Rachel, the oracle, had tried to read the future, and while she couldn't see much, she'd been certain that Leo needed to finish the Argo too before they could contact the Romans. Nevertheless, Annabeth had spent every spare moment scouring all sources for any rumours of Percy. She had talked to nature spirits, read legends about Rome, dug for clues on Daedalus's notebook, and spent hundreds of golden drachmas on iris messages to every friendly spirit, demigod, or monster she'd ever met, all with no luck. That particular afternoon, coming back from Sally's, Annabeth had felt even more drained than usual. She and Sally had first cried, and then attempted to pull themselves together, but their nerves were frayed. Finally, Annabeth took the Lexington Avenue subway down to Grand Central. There were other ways to get back to her high school dorm from the Upper East Side, but Annabeth liked going through Grand Central Terminal. The beautiful design and the vast open space reminded her of Mount Olympus. Grand buildings made her feel better, maybe because being in a place so permanent made her feel more permanent. She had just passed Sweet on America, the candy shop where Percy's mum used to work, and was thinking about going inside to buy some blue candy for old time's sake, when she saw Athena studying the subway map on the wall. Mother? Annabeth couldn't believe it. She hadn't seen her mum in months, not since Zeus had closed the gates of Olympus and forbade all communication with demigods. Many times Annabeth had tried to call her mum anyway, pleading for guidance, sending up burnt offerings with every meal at camp. She'd had no response. Now here was Athena, dressed in jeans and hiking boots and a red flannel shirt, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She held a backpack and a walking stick like she was prepared for a long journey. "I must return home," Athena murmured, studying the map. "The way is complex. I wish Odysseus was here. He would understand." "Mum," Annabeth said. "Athena." The goddess turned. She seemed to look right through Annabeth with no recognition. "That was my name," the goddess said dreamily, "before they sacked my city, took my identity, made me this." She looked at her clothes in disgust. "I must return home." Annabeth stepped back in shock. You're Minerva." "Don't call me that." The goddess's grey eyes flared with anger. "I used to carry a spear and a shield. I held victory in the palm of my hand. I was so much more than this." "Mum," Annabeth's voice trembled. "It's me, Annabeth, your daughter." "My daughter," Athena repeated. "Yes, my children will avenge me. They must destroy the Romans. Horrible, dishonourable copycat Romans." Hera argued that we must keep the two camps apart. I said, "No, let them fight. Let my children destroy the usurpers." Annabeth's heartbeat thumped in her ears. "You wanted that." But you're wise. You understand warfare better than any... Once, the goddess said, replaced, sacked, looted like a trophy and carted off, away from my beloved homeland. I lost so much. I swore I would never forgive. Neither would my children. She focused more closely on Annabeth. You are my daughter? Yes. The goddess fished something from the pocket of her shirt, an old-fashioned subway token, and pressed it into Annabeth's hand. Follow the mark of Athena, the goddess said. Avenge me. Annabeth had looked at the coin, and she watched it changed from a New York subway token to an ancient silver drachma, the kind used by Athenians. It showed an owl, Athena's sacred animal, with an olive branch on one side and a Greek inscription on the other, the mark of Athena. At the time, Annabeth had no idea what it meant. She didn't understand why her mum was acting like this. Minerva or not, she couldn't be so confused. Mum, she tried to make her tone as reasonable as possible. Percy is missing. I need your help. She had started to explain Hera's plan for bringing the camps together to battle Gaia and the giants, but the goddess stamped her walking stick against the marble floor. Never, she said. Anyone who helps Rome must perish. If you would join them, you are no child of mine. You have already failed me. Mother! I care nothing about this Percy. If he has gone over to the Romans, let him perish. Kill him. Kill all the Romans. Find the mark. Follow it to its source. Witness how Rome has disgraced me and pledge your vengeance. Athena isn't the goddess of revenge. Annabeth's nails bit into her palms. The silver coin seemed to grow warmer in her hand. Percy is everything to me. And revenge is everything to me, the goddess snarled. Which of us is wiser? Something is wrong with you. What's happened? Rome happened, the goddess said bitterly. See what they have done, making a Roman of me. They wish me to be their goddess. They let me taste their own evil. Kill them, child. No. Then you are nothing. The goddess turned to the subway map. Her expression softened, becoming confused and unfocused. If I could find the route, the way home, then perhaps... But no. Avenge me or leave me. You are no child of mine. Annabeth's eyes stung. She thought of 1,000 horrible things she wanted to say, but she couldn't. She had turned and fled. She tried to throw away the silver coin, but it simply reappeared in her pocket, the way Riptide did for Percy. Unfortunately, Annabeth's drachma had no magical powers, at least nothing useful. It only gave her nightmares, and no matter what she tried, she couldn't get rid of it. Now, sitting in her cabin aboard the Argo II, she could feel the coin growing warm in her pocket. She stared at the model of the Parthenon on her computer screen and thought about the argument with Athena. Phrases she'd heard over the last few days swirled in her head. A talented friend, ready for her visitor. No one will retrieve that statue. Wisdom's daughter walks alone. She was afraid she finally understood what it all meant. She prayed to the gods that she was wrong. A knock on her door made her jump. She hoped it might be Percy, but instead Frank Zhang poked his head in. Sorry, he said. Could I, She was so startled to see him that it took her a moment to realise he wanted to come in. Sure, she said. Yes. He stepped inside, looking around the cabin. There wasn't much to see. On her desk sat a stack of books, a journal and pen, a picture of her dad flying in his Sopwith Camel biplane, grinning and giving a thumbs up. Annabeth liked that photo. It reminded her of the time she'd felt closest to him, when he'd strafed an army of monsters with celestial bronze machine guns just to protect her. Pretty much the best present a girl could hope for. Hanging from a hook on the wall was her New York Yankees cap, her most prized possession from her mum. Once the cap had the power to turn its wearer invisible. Since Annabeth's argument with Athena, the cap had lost its magic. Annabeth wasn't sure why, but she'd stubbornly brought it along to the quest. Every morning she would try it on, hoping it would work again. So far, it had only served as a reminder of her mother's wrath. Otherwise, her cabin was bare. She kept it clean and simple, which helped her to think. Percy didn't believe it because she always made excellent grades. But, like most demigods, she was ADHD. When there were too many distractions in her personal space, she was never able to focus. So, Frank, she ventured, what can I do for you? Out of all the kids on the ship, Frank was the one she thought least likely to pay her a visit. She didn't feel any less confused when he blushed and pulled his Chinese handcuffs out of his pocket. I don't like being in the dark about this, he muttered. Could you show me the trick? I didn't feel comfortable asking anybody else. Annabeth processed the words with a slight delay. Wait, Frank was asking her for help? Then it dawned on her. Of course, Frank was embarrassed. Leo had been razzing him pretty hard. Nobody liked being a laughingstock. Frank's determined expression said he never wanted that to happen again. He wanted to understand the puzzle without the iguana solution. Annabeth felt strangely honoured. Frank trusted her not to make fun of him. Besides, she had a soft spot for anyone who was seeking knowledge, even about something as simple as Chinese handcuffs. She patted the bunk next to her. Absolutely. Sit down. Frank sat on the edge of the mattress, as if preparing for a quick escape. Annabeth took the Chinese handcuffs and held them next to her computer. She hit the key for an infrared scan. A few seconds later, a 3D model of the Chinese handcuffs appeared on the screen. She turned the laptop so that Frank could see. So, how did you do that? He marvelled. Cutting-edge ancient Greek technology, she said. Okay, look, the structure is a cylindrical biaxial braid, so it has excellent resilience. She manipulated the image so it squeezed in and out like an accordion. When you put your fingers inside, it loosens. But when you try to remove them, the circumference shrinks as the braid catches and tightens. There's no way you can pull free by struggling. Frank stared at her blankly. But what's the answer? Well, she showed him some of her calculations, how the handcuffs could resist tearing under incredible stress, depending on the material used in the braid. Pretty amazing for a woven structure, right? Doctors use it for traction and electrical contractors. But the answer? Annabeth laughed. You don't fight against the handcuffs. You push your fingers in, not out. That loosens the braid. Oh, Frank tried it, and it worked. Thanks, but couldn't you have just shown me on the handcuffs without the 3D program and the calculations? Annabeth hesitated. Sometimes wisdom came from strange places, even from giant teenage goldfish. I guess you're right. That was silly. I learned something too. Frank tried the handcuffs again. It's easy when you know the solution. Many of the best traps are simple, Annabeth said. You just have to think about it and hope your victim doesn't. Frank nodded. He seemed reluctant to leave. You know, Annabeth said, Leo doesn't intend to be mean. He's just got a big mouth. When people make him nervous, he uses humour as a defence. Frank frowned. Why would I make him nervous? You're twice his size. You can turn into a dragon, and Hazel likes you, Annabeth thought, though she didn't say that. Frank didn't look convinced. Leo can summon fire. He twisted the handcuffs. Annabeth, sometime, maybe could you help me with another problem that's not so simple? I've got, I guess you call it an Achilles heel. Annabeth felt like she'd just had a drink of Roman hot chocolate. She'd never really got the term warm and fuzzy, but Frank gave her that sensation. He was just a big teddy bear. She could see why Hazel liked him. I'd be happy to, she said. Does anyone else know about this Achilles heel? Percy and Hazel, he said. That's it, Percy, he's a really good guy. I would follow him anywhere. Thought you should know. Annabeth patted his arm. Percy has a knack for picking good friends, like you, but Frank, you can trust anyone on this ship, even Leo. We're all a team. We have to trust each other. I suppose. So what's the weakness you're worried about? The dinner bell sounded and Frank jumped. Maybe later, he said. It's hard to talk about, but thanks, Annabeth. He held up the Chinese handcuffs. Keep it simple. Chapter 18. Annabeth. That night, Annabeth slept without nightmares, which just made her uneasy when she woke up, like the calm before a storm. Leo docked the ship at a pier in Charleston Harbour, right next to a sea wall. Along the shore was a historical district with tall mansions, palm trees and wrought iron fences. Antique cannons pointed at the water. By the time Annabeth came up on deck, Jason, Frank and Leo had already left for the museum. According to Coach Hedge, they'd promised to be back by sunset. Piper and Hazel were ready to go, but first Annabeth turned to Percy, who was leaning on the starboard rail, gazing over the bay. Annabeth took his hand. What are you going to do while we're gone? Jump into the harbour, he said casually, like another kid might say, I'm going to get a snack. I want to try communicating with the local Nereids. Maybe they can give me some advice about how to free those captives in Atlanta. Besides, I think the sea might be good for me. Being in that aquarium made me feel unclean. His hair was dark and tangled as usual, but Annabeth thought about the streak of grey he used to have on one side. When the two of them were 14, they'd taken turns, unwillingly, holding the weight of the sky. The strain left them both with some grey hair. Over the last year, while Percy had been missing, the grey streaks had finally disappeared from both of them, which made Annabeth sad and a little worried. She felt like she'd lost a symbolic bond with Percy. Annabeth kissed him. Good luck, seaweed brain. Just come back to me, okay? I will, he promised. You do the same. Annabeth tried to push down her growing unease. She turned to Piper and Hazel. Okay, ladies, let's find the ghost of the battery. Afterwards, Annabeth wished she'd just jumped into the harbour with Percy. She even would have preferred a museum full of ghosts. Not that she minded hanging out with Hazel and Piper. At first, they had a pretty good time walking along the battery. According to the signs, the seaside park was called White Point Gardens. The ocean breeze swept away the muggy heat of the summer afternoon, and it was pleasantly cool under the shade of the palmetto trees. Lining the road were old Civil War cannons and bronze statues of historical figures, which made Annabeth shudder. She thought about the statues in New York City during the Titan War, which had come to life thanks to Daedalus's command sequence 23. She wondered how many other statues around the country were secretly automatons, waiting to be triggered. Charleston Harbour glittered in the sun. To the north and south, strips of land stretched out like arms enclosing the bay, and sitting in the mouth of the harbour about a mile out was an island with a stone fort. Annabeth had a vague memory of that fort being important in the Civil War, but she didn't spend much time thinking about it. Mostly she breathed in the sea air and thought about Percy. Gods forbid she ever had to break up with him. She'd never be able to visit the sea again without remembering her broken heart. She was relieved when they turned away from the sea wall and explored the inland side of the gardens. The park wasn't crowded. Annabeth imagined that most of the locals had gone on summer vacation or were holed up at home taking a siesta. They strolled along South Battery Street, which was lined with 4-story colonial mansions. The brick walls were blanketed with ivy. The facades had soaring white columns like Roman temples. The front gardens were bursting with rose bushes, honeysuckle, and flowering bougainvillea. It looked like Demeter had set the timer on all the plants to grow several decades ago and then forgotten to come back and check on them. Kind of reminds me of New Rome, Hazel said. All the big mansions and the gardens, the columns and arches. Annabeth nodded. She remembered reading how the American South had often compared itself to Rome back before the Civil War. In the old days, their society had been all about impressive architecture, honour and codes of chivalry. And on the evil side, it had also been about slavery. Rome had slaves. Some Southerners had argued, so why shouldn't we? Annabeth shivered. She loved the architecture here. The houses and the gardens were very beautiful, very Roman. But she wondered why beautiful things had to be wrapped up with evil history. Or was it the other way round? Maybe the evil history made it necessary to build beautiful things, to mask the darker aspects. She shook her head. Percy would hate her getting so philosophical. If she tried to talk to him about stuff like that, his eyes glazed over. The other girls didn't say much. Piper kept looking around like she expected an ambush. She had said she'd seen this park in the blade of her knife, but she wouldn't elaborate. Annabeth guessed she was afraid to. After all, the last time Piper had tried to interpret a vision from her knife, Percy and Jason had almost killed each other in Kansas. Hazel also seemed preoccupied. Maybe she was taking in their surroundings, or maybe she was worrying about her brother. In less than 4 days, unless they found him and freed him, Nico would be dead. Annabeth felt that deadline weighing on her too. She'd always had mixed feelings about Nico D'Angelo. She suspected that he'd had a crush on her ever since they rescued him and his big sister Bianca from that military academy in Maine. But Annabeth had never felt any attraction to Nico. He was too young and too moody. There was a darkness in him that made her uneasy. Still, she felt responsible for him. Back when they had met, neither of them had known about his half-sister, Hazel. At the time, Bianca had been Nico's only living family. When she had died, Nico became a homeless orphan, drifting through the world alone. Annabeth could relate to that. She was so deep in thought, she might have kept walking around the park forever, but Piper grabbed her arm. There. She pointed across the harbour. 100 yards out, a shimmering white figure floated on the water. At first, Annabeth thought it might be a boy or a small boat reflecting the sunlight, but it was definitely glowing, and it was moving more smoothly than a boat, making a straight line towards them. As it got closer, Annabeth could tell it was the figure of a woman. "The ghost," she said. "That's not a ghost," Hazel said. "No kind of spirit glows that brightly." Annabeth decided to take her word for it. She couldn't imagine being Hazel, dying at such a young age and coming back from the underworld, knowing more about the dead than the living. As if in a trance, Piper walked across the street towards the edge of the sea wall, narrowly avoiding a horse-drawn carriage. "Piper!" Annabeth called. "We'd better follow her," Hazel said. By the time Annabeth and Hazel caught up to her, the ghostly apparition was only a few yards away. Piper glared at it, like the sight offended her. "It is her," she grumbled. Annabeth squinted at the ghost, but it blazed too brightly to make out any details. Then the apparition floated up the seawall and stopped in front of them. The glow faded. Annabeth gasped. The woman was breathtakingly beautiful and strangely familiar. Her face was hard to describe. Her features seemed to shift from those of one glamorous movie star to another. Her eyes sparkled playfully, sometimes green or blue or amber. Her hair changed from long, straight blonde to dark chocolatey curls. Annabeth was instantly jealous. She'd always wished she had dark hair. She felt like nobody took her seriously as a blonde. She had to work twice as hard to get recognition as a strategist, an architect, a senior counsellor, anything that had to do with brains. The woman was dressed like a southern belle, just as Jason had described. Her gown had a low-cut bodice of pink silk and a three-tiered hoop skirt with white scalloped lace. She wore long white silk gloves and held a feathered pink and white fan to her chest. Everything about her seemed calculated to make Annabeth feel inadequate. The easy grace with which she wore her dress, the perfect yet understated makeup, the way she radiated feminine charm that no man could possibly resist. Annabeth realised that her jealousy was irrational. The woman was making her feel this way. She'd had this experience before. She recognised this person, even though her face changed by the second, becoming more and more beautiful. Aphrodite, she said. Venus? Hazel asked in amazement. Mum, Piper said, with no enthusiasm. Girls. The goddess spread her arms like she wanted a group hug. The three demigods did not oblige. Hazel backed into a palmetto tree. I'm so glad you're here, Aphrodite said. War is coming. Bloodshed is inevitable. So, there's really only one thing to do. And that is? Annabeth ventured. Why, have tea and chat, obviously. Come with me. Aphrodite knew how to do tea. She led them to the central pavilion in the gardens, a white pillared gazebo, where a table was set with silverware, china cups, and of course, steaming pot of tea, the fragrance shifting as easily as Aphrodite's appearance, sometimes cinnamon, or jasmine, or mint. There were plates of scones, cookies and muffins, fresh butter and jam, all of which, Annabeth figured, were incredibly fattening, unless, of course, you were the immortal goddess of love. Aphrodite sat, or held court, rather, in a wicker peacock chair. She poured tea and served cakes without getting a speck on her clothes, her posture always perfect, her smile dazzling. Annabeth hated her more and more the longer they sat. Oh, my sweet girls, the goddess said, I do love Charleston. The weddings I've attended in this gazebo, they bring tears to my eyes, and the elegant balls in the days of the old South. Ah, they were lovely. Many of these mansions still have statues of me in their gardens, though they called me Venus. Which are you? Annabeth asked. Venus or Aphrodite? The goddess sipped her tea. Her eyes sparkled mischievously. Annabeth Chase, you've grown into quite a beautiful young lady. You really should do something with your hair, though. And Hazel Levesque, your clothes. My clothes? Hazel looked down at her rumpled denim, not self-consciously but baffled, as if she couldn't imagine what was wrong with them. Mother, Piper said, you're embarrassing me. Well, I don't see why, the goddess said. Just because you don't appreciate my fashion tips, Piper, doesn't mean the others won't. I could do a quick makeover for Annabeth and Hazel, perhaps silk ball gowns like mine. Mother! Fine, Aphrodite sighed. To answer your question, Annabeth, I am both Aphrodite and Venus. Unlike many of my fellow Olympians, I changed hardly at all from one age to the other. In fact, I like to think I haven't aged a bit. Her fingers fluttered around her face appreciatively. Love is love, after all. Whether you're Greek or Roman, this civil war won't affect me as much as it will the others. Wonderful, Annabeth thought. Her own mother, the most level-headed Olympian, was reduced to a raving, vicious scatterbrain in a subway station, and of all the gods who might help them, the only ones not affected by the Greek-Roman schism seemed to be Aphrodite, Nemesis, and Dionysus. Love, revenge, wine. Very helpful. Hazel nibbled a sugar cookie. We're not in a war yet, my lady. Oh, dear Hazel, Aphrodite folded her fan. Such optimism. Yet you have heart-rending days ahead of you. Of course war is coming. Love and war always go together. They are the peaks of human emotion. Evil and good, beauty and ugliness. She smiled at Annabeth as if she knew what Annabeth had been thinking earlier about the Old South. Hazel set down her sugar cookie. She had a few crumbs on her chin, and Annabeth liked the fact that Hazel either didn't know or didn't care. What do you mean? Hazel asked. Heart-rending days. The goddess laughed as if Hazel were a cute puppy. Well, Annabeth could give you some idea. I once promised to make her love life interesting. And didn't I? Annabeth almost snapped the handle off her teacup. For years her heart had been torn. First there was Luke Castellan, her first crush, who had seen her only as a little sister. Then he turned evil and decided he liked her, right before he died. Next came Percy, who was infuriating but sweet. Yet he had seemed to be falling for another girl named Rachel. And then he almost died, several times. Finally, Annabeth had got Percy to herself, only to have him vanish for 6 months and lose his memory. Interesting, Annabeth said, is a mild way of putting it. Well, I can't take credit for all your troubles, the goddess said, but I adore twists and turns in a love story. Oh, all of you are such excellent stories. I mean, girls, you do me proud. Mother, Piper said, is there a reason you're here? Oh, you mean besides the tea? I often come here. I love the view, the food, the atmosphere. You can just smell the romance and heartbreak in the air, can't you? Centuries of it. She pointed to a nearby mansion. Do you see that rooftop balcony? We had a party there the night of the American Civil War began. The shelling of Fort Sumter. That's it, Annabeth remembered. The island in the harbour. That's where the first fighting of the Civil War happened. The Confederates shelled the Union troops and took the fort. Oh, such a party, Aphrodite said. A string quartet, and all the men in their elegant new officers' uniforms, the women's dresses. You should have seen them. I danced with Ares, or was he Mars? I'm afraid I was a little giddy. And the beautiful bursts of light across the harbour, the roar of the cannons giving the men an excuse to put their arms around their frightened sweethearts. Annabeth's tea was cold. She hadn't eaten anything, but she felt like she wanted to throw up. You're talking about the beginning of the bloodiest war in US history. Over 600,000 people died, more Americans than in World War I and World War II combined. And the refreshments, Aphrodite continued. Ah, they were divine. General Beauregard himself made an appearance. He was such a scoundrel. He was on his second wife then, but you should have seen the way he looked at Lisbeth Cooper. Mother! Piper tossed her scone on the pigeons. Yes, sorry, the goddess said. To make the story short, I'm here to help you girls. I doubt you'll be seeing Hera much. Your little quest has hardly made her welcome in the throne room. And the other gods are rather indisposed, as you know, torn between their Roman and Greek sides, some more than others. Aphrodite fixed her gaze on Annabeth. I suppose you've told your friends about your falling out with your mother. Heat rose to Annabeth's cheeks. Hazel and Piper looked at her curiously. Falling out? Hazel asked. An argument, Annabeth said. It's nothing. Nothing, the goddess said. Well, I don't know about that. Athena was the most Greek of all goddesses, the patron of Athens, after all. When the Romans took over, they adopted Athena after a fashion. She became Minerva, the goddess of crafts and cleverness. But the Romans had other war gods who were more to their taste, more reliably Roman, like Bellona. Rayna's mum, Piper muttered. Yes, indeed, the goddess agreed. I had a lovely talk with Rayna a while back, right here in the park. And the Romans had Mars, of course. And later, there was Mithras. Not even properly Greek or Roman, but the legionnaires were crazy about his cult. I always found him crass and terribly nouveau doux, personally. At any rate, the Romans quite sidelined poor Athena. They took away most of her military importance. The Greeks never forgave the Romans for that insult. Neither did Athena. Annabeth's ears buzzed. The mark of Athena, she said. It leads to a statue, doesn't it? It leads to the statue. Aphrodite smiled. You are clever, like your mother. Understand, though, your siblings, the children of Athena, have been searching for centuries. None has succeeded in recovering the statue. In the meantime, they've been keeping alive the Greek feud with the Romans. Every civil war, so much bloodshed and heartbreak, has been orchestrated largely by Athena's children. Annabeth wanted to say impossible, but she remembered Athena's bitter words in Grand Central Station, the burning hatred in her eyes. Romantic? Aphrodite offered. Yes, I supposed it is. But Annabeth tried to clear the frog from her brain. The mark of Athena. How does it work? Is it a series of clues, or a trail set by Athena? Aphrodite looked politely bored. I couldn't say. I don't believe Athena created the mark consciously. If she knew where her statue was, she'd simply tell you where to find it. No, I'd guess the mark is more like a spiritual trail of breadcrumbs. It's a connection between the statue and the children of the goddess. The statue wants to be found, you see, but it can only be freed by the most worthy. And for thousands of years, Annabeth said, no one has managed. Hold on, Piper said. What statue are we talking about? The goddess laughed. Oh, I'm sure Annabeth can fill you in. At any rate, the clue you need is close by. A map of sorts, left by the children of Athena in 1861. A remembrance that will start you on your path, once you reach Rome. But as you said, Annabeth Chase, no one has ever succeeded in following the mark of Athena to its end. There you will face your worst fear, the fear of every child of Athena. And even if you survive, how will you use your reward? For war or for peace? Annabeth was glad about the tablecloth, because under the table her legs were trembling. This map, she said. Where is it? Guys! Hazel pointed to the sky. Circling above the palmetto trees were two large eagles. Higher up, descending rapidly, was a flying chariot pulled by a pegasi. Apparently, Leo's diversion with Buford, the end table, hadn't worked. At least not for long. Aphrodite spread butter on a muffin as if she had all the time in the world. Oh, the map is at Fort Sumter, of course. She pointed her butter knife towards the island across the harbour. It looks like the Romans have arrived to cut you off. I'd get back to your ship in a hurry if I were you. Would you care for some tea cakes to go?